How's that?
Wow, that was
a
great.
whole sports metaphor. All right. Welcome, everybody, to Administrative Committee. First thing on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from September 23rd, 2024.
I think we should approve them.
Okey doke.
No changes.
Sounds good to me. Since Bryce wasn't here, I'm not going to really ask for his approval.
I was sitting in the galley.
Oh, okay.
It sounded good to me.
Next on the agenda is the amended professional services agreement with the Moscow City for the Moscow City shop.
Okay.
Hi, Cody.
Well, it's good to see you all again. It's been, a little while in the formal setting. But included in your packet, as you'll recall, back in April of this year, we entered into a professional services agreement with Lombard Conrad Architects for design services for the new city shop. Progress is proceeding as planned. We're slated to open bids next Wednesday. We're fortunate. There seems to be quite a bit of interest in the project, so hoping for good numbers there. But as we've worked through the project, a few things became apparent that we needed to amend the scope of the agreement with Lombard Conrad. There's a little bit of landscape design work needed for the parking lot at the southern entrance to the site. Additional civil work for the gate along the east property line, and then we also asked them to redesign the mechanical heating and air system for the office space portion of the shop to be more consistent with our climate action goals. And then finally, we always anticipated a project, kind of a rehab of the existing shop building. Because there's going to be on site anyway, we asked them to, or we included as an alternate in this bid, the recladding or re-roofing of the existing shop. And so this amended agreement includes design services for that. All of that totals, I believe it's just over $22,000 to add to that amended agreement. And so our ask today is that you do recommend approval of that amended agreement to the full council. And I would note that it doesn't change anything in terms of project schedule.
I have a question.
Yep.
Out of curiosity, how did we miss not going with the climate action plan part before? I don't remember thinking about that either, honestly.
You know what, at first they came back with the entire building, and the large shop spaces don't really lend themselves from an efficiency standpoint, but we, noted that maybe we could separate the systems and see a benefit for just the office portions of that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And sorry, you're talking about improvements to the exterior of the whole building, and that wasn't included originally?
To the old shop, to the existing shop
Okay.
building. Yep. Streets and Storm are still going to occupy that building, and this would be effectively to weatherproof it, to seal it up and get another 15, maybe 20 years out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
As committee may recall, when we talked about the awarding or moving forward to the project for the new shop, we were going to be making some reinvestments in the existing shop to try to get at least another 20 years of life out of that facility. While we have a contractor on site building the new metal building, doing all the metal cladding, we would get some economies of scale of doing that metal cladding on the existing shop at the same time. So that's why we ended up adding it to the scope of this project to get that taken care of. On the HVAC system, it did come back as natural gas primary. And I know for most of our buildings, we've been trying to do like air source heat pumps so that it was not a fossil fuel based heating system. So this was for us to go back in the areas that we could accommodate electric HVAC equipment to go back to that in the occupied office spaces with air source heat pumps.
Okay.
All right.
And it comes out of what budget? I'm sorry, I just don't remember.
Just a combination of water, sewer, and general capital, and we are using some of our ARPA funds for this project.
And these improvements would happen this upcoming season?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Construction, we're anticipating will start in the spring.
Okay, great.
And then my last comment is there will be another agreement coming forward to look at interior renovations to the existing shop. So just so you're aware, we're going to deal with the exterior cladding, but there are electrical system upgrades, and then there's some interior reconfiguration to have that building serve the new tenants best. So we're working on scoping that out right now with LCA. We don't expect that to be a significant agreement, but it will have some cost to it. But it didn't match the current scope for this agreement, so that would be a separate design agreement that we'll be bringing forward to the council for your consideration.
Okay, thanks. I think it's been so long since we talked about it. I had to
Has been a little while.
Yeah.
rethink about the project. Okay. Can we put that on consent?
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
all for it.
Okay, is that all right?
Okay, thank
Thanks,
you.
Cody.
Thanks, Cody.
Good to see you. All right, next on our agenda is the ordinance amending Moscow City Code Title 4, Chapter 6 regarding landscape buffer yard requirements with Mike Gray.
Afternoon.
Hello.
Mike?
So this is an ordinance the commission's been working on for about the last year. It's amending landscape buffer yard requirements. So what is a landscape buffer yard? Typically a vegetative area consisting of trees and shrubs intended to provide a visual buffer between uses of varying intensity. So you can see essentially this area here. So this is Hillcrest Motel, Moscow Building Supply, and then we have residential uses here, so multifamily residential uses. So a vegetative buffer intended to provide kind of that buffer between varying intensity uses. So when it's applied, when there's different zoning districts, so you have motor business, for instance, for the commercial uses, and then residential, our R4 multifamily zone. So that's typically when that's required. We have a matrix that pretty much implements that. So just a little bit of purpose statement about what they're intended to do: provide a visual buffer between uses of different intensity, reduce erosion, stormwater runoff, protect property values, and eliminate potential land use conflicts by mitigating adverse impacts from dust, odor, litter, noise, glare, lights, signs, buildings, or parking areas. So these have not been updated for some time, so therefore the commission wishes to update the requirements, also provide a little bit more flexibility in the application of their standards. And this is the matrix within our code right now. You can see the zone of the proposed use on the top. So these are our zoning districts. Then you have the zone of the adjacent property. So you would go down, for instance, R4 down to what would be motor business, and there'd be a beat buffer. There are currently errors in this. So there's notice a blank column here. And then down here, BN, we don't have a zone that currently reflects BN. It's supposed to be motor business. So just correcting those errors. And then we have a zone, urban mixed commercial, which has been added since the last time this is updated. So just adding that within the matrix as well. And then these are three types of buffer. So A, B, and C. The least intensive is the A buffer all the way up to the C buffer. C buffer includes a fence. And these also vary in width, but are allowed to go down to 10 feet in width with an irrigation system. So the A is 12, B is 14, and C is 16, but they can be reduced to 10. And then really just vary. A's 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs. And then they just increase as intensity as you go down the list. But as you can see, this looks like it's been photocopied probably since the 90s, and that's included in our zoning code. So just going through and updating. So this is just to be consistent with other portions of our code as we've done the land use table. Just making this consistent, eliminating that blank column, and then adding the additional zone. Really didn't do a whole lot of changes between what's typically required for A, B, and C within the matrix, but went through and updated the visuals on or the illustrations on the A, B, and C buffers. So that's consistent with like our landscaping standards and the parking and for parking lots. It looks similar to this. And then one item of note is we just universally it's 10 feet, regardless of whether or not there's an irrigation system installed or not. Really, it's an ongoing obligation of the property owner to maintain the trees and the shrubs. We really don't care if there's an irrigation system. Typically, within first 2 years, you irrigate those to get them established. But beyond that, you really don't need to water them too much. So really, we just care that those trees and shrubs stay alive for the long term. And we do audits every once in a while to make sure that those still exist on developments. So that's one item of note. So it brings us to the current code. Not much has changed in this first section. So we go through the purpose statement, where buffer yards are required, table of required buffer yards, so referencing the matrix there, and then buffer yard standards, A, B, and C. We have a slight change here. It says buffer yard requirements vary depending upon intensity of both the zoning district or the proposed use. And it previously said, or I guess it currently says, its neighbors. And so I think the more appropriate thing to say here would be the zoning district to the adjacent property. And then location, just need to be at the perimeter of the lot or parcel which the development occurs, extending from lot line to lot line. That section. And then we get into plant size requirements. So just making this consistent with our parking lot landscaping section. So this is just industry standard when you go and buy these types of, understory trees or shrubs or canopy trees, just making that consistent with what the current industry terms are. Existing vegetation, stating that you can pretty much use existing vegetation to satisfy these requirements. Fence and berm section, no proposed changes there. Arterial streets, so right now, say you have a type C buffer yard required and there's a separation between the properties with an arterial street, you're able to reduce that in intensity to a B buffer yard. But there's a lot of properties that there's an A buffer yard and there's really no option to reduce that since A is the least intensive. So we're proposing that if a buffer yard would normally be required, then an A buffer yard may be reduced to 5 feet in width instead of the 10 in order to allow a reduction there adjacent to an arterial street. And then the commission wanted to reference that in preparation of these buffer yard plans, that native plantings and xeriscaping are encouraged for water savings, reduced maintenance, reduction in fertilizers and pesticides, and increased pollination and the reduction in yard waste. And so once again, this is similar to what we have in our parking lot landscaping section that they worked pretty a long time on. Time of completion, pretty much just allowing some flexibility there up to 12 months. Like I mentioned before, this is an ongoing obligation of the property owner. So there's a section there which essentially states this for perpetuity of the property. And then a new section we're adding, consideration of adjacent uses. So in circumstances where the proposed use of a property and existing use of the adjacent property are similar intensity and compatibility, zoning administrators shall be permitted to allow deviations in buffer yard standards, including the elimination of buffer yards if deemed appropriate. And so there's numerous circumstances over the years where this has come up. This is the former MZ property here, Jackson Allman Street. And if you look at the zoning configuration, so it's that old historically agricultural industrial zoning district, which is a remnant of the ag industrial use, the railroad that went through the area. They didn't need to rezone in order to construct that building. And so it's remained within the industrial zone, even though it doesn't reflect what's currently constructed on the property. And so technically, even between motor business and industrial, there's buffer yards required. And then of course, between industrial and R4, those are required as well. And so this is just given an opportunity to take a look at what the current uses are and the proposed uses and allow deviations to those landscaping standards. So this is an example. The C buffer yard requires a 6 foot tall fence unless you put a 3 foot tall berm. I mean, imagine a 6 foot tall fence all along this frontage here. It wouldn't be really conducive to pedestrians or the adjacent neighborhood. So luckily they chose to do the 3 foot landscape buffer in lieu of the fence. And then there's just the other area on C Street, recycling centers to the north. It's nice to have this landscaping, but maybe it should be allowed to be reduced to, the 5 feet. And then for pedestrian kind of scale, more transitioning in a more urban environment with central business. It's nice to have the building up against adjacent to the street. Plus they have a parking lot across the street over here. And so this is a national highway. And so what are you buffering? I think it's more advantageous to put the building up to the street and not have the buffer there. So those are circumstances. And then Animal Clinic and Hospital, Logan Street and Troy Road. Sometimes we have zoning configurations that don't make a whole lot of sense. They're remnants. You have Paradise Creek and Paradise Path across the street to the south, but this motor business zone extends over there. So technically, you'd have probably a type A buffer that'd be required as part of that, even though, directly across the street, you have the creek and the path. So it's circumstances like that where, we like a little bit of flexibility in order to allow some deviations in the standards. And so that's really just the reason why we crafted the last section of the ordinance.
Can I ask you a quick question on that?
Sure.
So is there a process that they have to go through to get that change? Or they can just say, hey, we're in a weird spot. How does this look? Can we not do it? Like,
It'd just be at the time of development through the building permit process, but zoning would take a look at that and really figure out whether or not it made sense or not.
great, thanks.
So staff's recommendations, the committee forward the proposed ordinance for public hearing at the upcoming November 4th council meeting. Certainly try to answer any questions you had.
I have a few questions. So did you involve the tree commission in this revision?
I didn't involve the tree commission, but they were involved extensively with the parking lot landscaping standards update that occurred in the late 2010s, like 2017, 2018.
Mhm. And so from what I understand, it was 16 feet something, 12 feet and 10 feet, but people could just do 10 feet, even though it said 16 feet in the old standards.
Yeah, so how it currently reads is it varies from 12 to 16 feet in width, but if you install an irrigation system, then it can be reduced to 10 feet. So what we were seeing was almost all of the landscape buffers that are required ended up going down to 10 because they'd say they'd irrigate them in some fashion.
And that includes, a guy with a bucket. Okay. This is a little picky, but I'm just going to say it. The section where you're talking about shrubs, you differentiate between shrubs and perennials, but shrubs are perennials. So are you saying that there's other kind of perennials that could be put in there, like perennial grasses or?
Yeah, decorative grasses could certainly go in there as well, like Carl Forrester, is an example of that.
Okay. So it can be shrubs or perennials. The language on it just makes it sound like shrubs are not perennials and shrubs are perennials.
Yeah, I mean, it could be perennial, deciduous, or evergreen. I mean,
Okay.
that's kind of the options,
Shrubs are perennials.
but there's shrubs that could be deciduous or evergreen as well.
Those are perennials too. Perennial just means it comes back every year. A non-perennial would be like a marigold, right? You put a marigold in, it's an annual because it dies every year.
Uh-huh.
But if you put a tulip in, it's a perennial
Sure.
because it comes back every year.
Okay.
Anyway, it might just be some wording that you could look at. All right, those are my, how often are these audited to make sure they're not just dead?
We
Is it
typically do it
random?
around every 5 years. Yeah, would pull all multifamily and commercial properties that are typically required and audit those.
And then you go back to the existing owner? Like what if if a previous owner put it in and then it dies, who's responsible for the
It'd be
buffer?
current
owner.
Yeah.
All right, those are all my questions.
I don't have any questions.
I have a weird question, and it's not nitpicky.
It's not as bad as what a perennial.
It was not, well, although I did get a little, I thought about section versus section, uppercase, lower, but I'm not going to go there. My question is, I know that it was planning and zoning that was going through all this, right?
Mhm.
Was there, was there anything that really surprised you going through this process that they kind of globbed onto? Like they really wanted to change or fix or make more clear? Was there any one thing they really got focused on?
I wouldn't say.
Okay.
No, there really wasn't any one thing. I mean, it was just, Victoria certainly wanted the xeriscaping
Yeah,
reference in there.
Makes sense.
But yeah.
cool.
Yeah, and it was seeing this on the agenda. Like I was at that planning and zoning back in July,
Yeah.
being the liaison, and so familiar. And I think they had a really nice discussion with it. So
Yeah.
trusting their recommendation.
No, me too. I was on, I've subbed enough times to
Yeah.
have, this is not the first time coming through. So it's great to see it coming up to us. So yeah,
And it's funny because I live at the top of C Street, and so one of my walking routes is to always just jet down C.
Yeah.
And so now that like I know this buffer, and since you used the pictures with the old MZ building, I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what's happening here. Yeah, it's like very, very easy and helpful.
I think
But-
these are good.
Okay, so this will be, well, it's a hearing, so it'll
Yeah.
be on the regular
Correct. Yep.
agenda.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
All right.
Yeah, when I walk down, I imagine like that fence, and I'm really glad they didn't. I'm really glad they didn't put a fence.
Now you know
in.
why there's they built it up.
The buffer,
and- Yeah,
yeah.
okay. All right, next on the agenda is City of Moscow Financial Policy Update with Sarah Decker.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Sarah.
Good. All right, so the main purpose of this update is that we have not updated our financial policy since 2011. And we do have updated processes within the city and some updates to Idaho code that we want to reflect within the policy. I'll kind of briefly go through the changes that we've made. In general, the policy itself has been kind of rewritten to flow a lot easier from general purpose down to the specifics of revenue expenditure, capital projects, fund balance, debt service, things like that. But the updates in regards to the revenue section are the treasurer report and the monthly revenue report. That per Idaho State Code is to be reported no more than 60 days after the closing of the month. And previously we had that, I think it was on the 10th day of every month that we had to have that reported. So we made that update. In the expenditure section, we noted the procurement and purchasing policy, which is newly adopted as of this year, and that employees will adhere to that in regards to travel, meetings, and conference expenses. We have the treasurer report, our quarterly reports. Our financial statements need to be reported 30 days from the end of each quarter, and our claims for payment need to be presented to council prior to payment made. In our fund balance section, we have some updates to funds. Our art fund was actually removed. It used to be a standalone fund, and now it's in the recreation and culture section. And so that was included within that for 3 months of operating budget reserve. We included our Moscow community playfields with a 2-month operating reserve, and then our stormwater fund with a 3-month operating reserve. Within the language, we did update in regards to new funds that there will be no reserve requirement until there is sufficient surplus to establish a fund balance without creating a deficit. And so that's actually the biggest updates that we have within the policy. So if you have any questions.
You're going to bring the claims to payment prior to the payments to Public Works and Finance now? Is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
It'll come to both committees. So be
Come to
Public Works,
both,
Finance, and Admin, just because we need to keep on a cadence of being able to pay bills at least every 2 weeks.
Mhm.
So it'll be standing item on the council, likely consent agenda,
Mhm.
and then it'll be reviewed by both committees.
And you can, once Public Works and Finance or admin say yes, then you can spend the money, or you have
We'll have
to
to wait
go
for
to
the council.
all the-
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll have to wait for the council. Once it gets approved on consent agenda, then checks can be processed that time.
Okay.
How long did it take to go through and finalize all this?
You know, it took a little bit of time. We've
Yeah.
actually been looking at it over the last year, paying attention to the updates. We knew we had the purchasing policy and things like that coming forward. And so we've just been taking our time to make sure with this update that we're capturing everything we can so we don't have to do it again for a while.
Nice. That's never an easy thing to do.
Right.
I'm good.
Is there any reason we should bring this to full council as opposed to consent, just so it's more on the for
I think it should be on regular agenda.
okay.
Just so it's before the full council.
Great.
I mean, it is the city's financial policies. I think it'd be
Mhm.
appropriate for the full council to review it.
Makes sense.
Lucky you.
Sarah may have been wishing for a different answer.
Yeah, sorry,
but
Sarah.
That's okay. All right,
Her
let's
legs
put
aren't very
that
long,
on
Bill.
the regular agenda.
I'm way over here.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda is the procurement and purchasing policy amendment with Bill. Procurement.
Yes. One word.
just going to slide over here for a moment. So a little bit of background, as the council's aware, in 2023, council adopted a procurement and purchasing policy through resolution 2023-24. That policy included and provided guidance on, essentially legal obligations as it relates to all of the potential corruptions and conflicts of interest, as well as legal obligations required for procurement of public works construction or professional design services in all those legal requirements. So included all the statutory references. It also established employee purchase authority limits, just so we had some clarity about who can approve what. It also included employee contract signatory authority limits, because we did have a wide range of different employees signing agreements or sometimes invoices that look like invoices that technically were binding contracts. And so it was really intended to provide clarity about at what level can employees sign an agreement and bind the city. It also established standards for when a written agreement or contract is required. So anything over $20,000 for any personal services does require a written contract that's reviewed by the city attorney. And then we also included standards related to vendor charge accounts. These are your ROSARs, MBS charge accounts, as well as credit card use. So that was kind of the primary focuses there. We have identified a couple additional items that we would like to add into this policy for the council's consideration. So there is the first one, which is titled Limitations on Certain Expenses. Very, very vague, but it really is intended to document current business practices surrounding things such as food service to employees. So oftentimes it happens in emergency events. If we have a water main break in the middle of the night, somebody may run to McDonald's, grab a bunch of food, keep the crews fed so they can keep working through the night. So we do have that happening. We wanted to recognize that in the policy and say that's fine, in order to allow employees to continue to work through that emergency to get restoration in a timely fashion. That is an approved expense during that time. We also want
I
to
don't have to call you at 3 a.m. and say, Bill,
Correct.
could you
No.
run to?
Go ahead.
you run to
You can go ahead and
Winco?
take care of that. The second is we do have occasional team building activities. So a department may go spend a couple hours doing something. We do recognize the value to that. So we wanted to set up guidance of when that could occur, that needs to be reviewed and approved by the city administrator, but that occasional, we see the value in both employee retention, productivity, and better communication, team adhesion. And then the other one was just kind of looking at general meal expenditures as it may relate to city meetings. So we already kind of talked through the emergency response events. Again, department supervisors are allowed to make reasonable food and drink purchases, non-alcoholic, of course, because the other portions of the policy prohibit that, to allow employees to continue and work continuously to address the emergency events. Again, I talked about the occasional team building activities, again, subject to the city administrator's review and approval. And then the final one was really meeting, meals, and refreshments. This was something in the past that we saw maybe more of. Maybe a department was having a meeting and they decided to have it over lunch, and then it gets charged to the city. And that was kind of an activity that I curtailed when I took this position. And so we just kind of wanted to formalize that in policy, that essentially it may be appropriate, but only under certain conditions. And it's something that's extraordinary, not normal staff meetings. And there's a list of criteria in the policy that I could just kind of briefly review there for you. I didn't want to put in the PowerPoint with too much text. But essentially, the purpose of the meeting is to conduct official city business, provide training to employees or city officials. Meals are an integral part of the business meeting or training session. The meeting or training is a special situation or occasion outside of normal business of city employees. City funds may not be used to provide meals for routine staff meetings, routine department meetings, or other event deemed to be social in nature other than city employee recognition events authorized by the mayor. That approval is obtained prior to the meeting, documented by a request for approval. That the amount paid for each individual meal, including tax and gratuity, does not exceed the applicable meal allowance for location of the meeting, so the per diem amounts. Any added tip may not exceed 15% of the cost of food and excluding tax, so the city obtains itemized receipts for the actual cost of the meals. So just kind of provide some guidelines of when that's appropriate and when authorization is required.
That's smart.
Then the last section addresses donations, sponsorships, and other financial contributions to outside organizations. This is something that we get requests fairly often on events. A lot of times, whether it's Rendezvous or it's Hempfest, we may get a request for a waiver of sanitation fees for the dumpster roll-off or for other things we might have related to that event. But then we also have certain commissions that get requested to sponsor events and activities. And so the goal here is to provide some guidance of when it's appropriate to do that and to set up a process and policy for that. So this policy is intended to provide guidance regarding those requests for donations, sponsorships, or other financial assistance, however it's characterized. From any outside organization or entity. And this is important because the city is limited in our ability to provide public funds to outside organizations under the state constitution. So we have to be kind of careful. It really needs to be something that the city is a service the city could otherwise provide, but we're supporting this other entity in providing that service, or enhances some of the services the city could provide.
Something on that, because
Yeah.
I know we've kind of gone over this before, and I still run up into a fuzzy wall. So I know that on the Human Rights Commission, they're always wanting to sponsor movies.
Correct.
And how does that fit into this? How do you say this is a benefit or not? Or
So let me walk through this just
Perfect.
briefly, and then we'll kind of talk
Okay.
about that.
It's just what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
like, huh?
Yeah, and that's been one that has happened fairly
Yeah.
often. So the policy states city will only consider donations or sponsorship programs or services that provide a service that the city legally could provide, but chooses not to, or provides a service that complements or enhances a service that the city currently provides. So again, it needs to be something that's within our wheelhouse that we're willing to support. If we don't do something, what's something? We don't sell cars, so we're not going to provide a donation to a car dealer. But we do have an obligation to provide animal control services. So we provide and contract with the Humane Society for those services. We could do tourism promotion and outreach, but we choose to contract with the chamber for that service. So there's a lot of things that we contract with. There are services that would be, a reasonable and approved governmental function. And we can certainly extend those services by partnering with other organizations or providing contributions or donations. The city could run Rendezvous. It could be our event. It's a benefit to the community, but we don't. And we might provide some other form of financial support, like waiving the rental fee or something like that. But it's a program or event that we could conduct and organize. That the program or service is aligned with and supports the city's mission and purpose, and it provides an identifiable public benefit. So those are kind of the three general criteria. Policy provides a framework for making a written application and a review process, breaks it up into kind of small and larger. So small is $500 or less, which would be reviewed and approved by the city administrator. Certainly, I would consult with the mayor if there are any gray areas on a particular request. If it's a larger request, so it's greater than $500, then that would be reviewed and approved by the city council. It does require a written agreement that limits the use, and this could be just a letter agreement, something very simple that, and probably will come up with a form agreement that limits the use of the funds to the agreed upon purposes. And if it's determined to use it for some other purpose, then they'd have to repay that contribution. So maybe just to back up briefly, and really those are going to be the three criteria. And that has become the question, if Human Rights Commission wants to sponsor an event or a movie, is it aligned with the charge and role of that commission? If it is, then that's something that I think is certainly something that the commission can support. And I know the commission has been wanting to expand their reach with kind of the limited resources they have. So they view sponsorship as being kind of one of the ways they can do that. They can partnership with the Latah County Human Rights or somebody else. If they can partner, they think they can have a greater impact and be able to continue to support their mission. But it really comes down to kind of looking at that mission, making sure that it's aligned with it. And that can be a bit tricky. We had one here where it was an event, can't recall the organization's name, but it was really intended to promote, polite conversations about political matters.
The Brave Angels.
That's what it is. Yes. And so we're going to bring 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats, and we're going to demonstrate a peaceful conversation. And there's just questionable whether that was really a human rights or discrimination issue. And so that was one I did consult with the mayor. The mayor did not feel it was appropriate for the city to be engaging in something that was somewhat political and near a campaign, and also not clearly within the human rights umbrella. So there are going to be those situations that may be a little bit gray. But then there's other activities like the Martin Luther Breakfast, and there's other things that would be much more aligned with the mission and purpose of the goal, which is to promote awareness and education related to human rights issues. And so that's kind of one of those that we'll just have to review kind of on that case by case basis.
And in September's human rights meeting, Bill did come and kind of walk through this
Oh.
exact thing in front of the commission. So, and I think the commission found that tremendously helpful.
So anyhow, we just would like to get that into policy. So that's it for that particular section. So really, it's just adding those two sections related to those certain expenditures, adding the section regarding donations, contributions, and financial support. And then the third thing I didn't identify here is it's changing titles. So it had city supervisor throughout the document. So we're just updating that to city administrator or deputy city administrator. So just bringing that up to the current titles.
That's smart.
This seems like it should go on regular agenda.
Sure.
Anybody?
I'm good with that.
Okay. Great. With that,
Would the committee provide any recommendation on?
Oh, I would recommend that we go with it.
recommend approval
Approval, yes.
on the regular agenda. And
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
all right.
That would be great.
Anything else?
Nothing from staff?
I'm good.
Thanks.
Okay. And we can adjourn. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for